The afternoon sun fell across the porch in Montana like honey through cheesecloth, thick and golden and slow. Thomas Mercer sat in the wooden chair his hands had built 30 years prior, watching the wind move through grass that stretched from here to the horizon. The land rolled out in waves of green and gold, cut through with fence lines he knew by heart. His land, hard-won, paid for in blood and fire and something darker still. Beside him his grandson Daniel shifted in the smaller chair, 16 years old, and restless in the way young men are when summer stretches long and purpose feels distant. The boy had asked a simple question, the kind of question that carried weight a young man could not yet feel. "Grandpa, how come you never talk about great-grandpa William?" Thomas did not answer right away. His eyes stayed fixed on the distant ridge where the sun would set in another 3 hours. He could see the old stable from here, the one rebuilt in stone after the fire. Could see the main house standing proud on the hill. Could see the carved wooden sign at the property entrance visible even at this distance if you knew where to look. Grayson and Mercer. Two names that should never have been joined. Two families that fate and fire had forged together. His hand moved without thinking to the small table between them where a wooden plaque sat weathered and smooth. His fingers traced the carved letters. Grayson Mercer Ranch, established 1885. "Son," Thomas said finally, his voice carrying the gravel of 65 years, "there are stories a man doesn't want to tell, but needs to." Daniel waited. The boy had learned patience at least, had learned that when old men started talking, you let them find their way to the words. "Because if I don't tell you," Thomas continued, "you won't understand what you're standing on, won't understand what all this cost." He gestured to the land, the buildings, the empire of grass and cattle and horses that bore their family name. He reached for his coffee, took a slow sip, let the silence build. "This story starts in 1885, when I was 25 years old." Daniel's eyes widened slightly. His grandfather never spoke about his youth, never spoke about the early days, just worked the ranch, ran the horses, lived quiet in the way men of his generation did. "When I had nothing," Thomas said, "nothing but a horse and a promise I'd already broken." The old man's eyes went distant, seeing past the present, past the accumulated years, seeing a younger version of himself, a desperate version, a version he'd spent 40 years trying to forget and honor in equal measure. "Let me tell you about the summer I crossed the Montana Badlands with nothing left to lose. Let me tell you about Nathan Grayson, and let me tell you about the night fire came again." The Montana sun in August of 1885 was not a source of light. It was a presence, a weight, a white coin hammered flat against the sky, pressing down on everything below with merciless intensity. Thomas Mercer, 25 years old and hollowed out by grief, urged his horse forward across cracked earth that stretched in every direction like the surface of a dried lake bed. The Badlands here were not the dramatic formations of Dakota Territory. They were simply broken, land that had given up pretending to sustain life. Red dirt split open in jagged lines, sagebrush twisted and gray, not a tree in sight, not a cloud, not a bird, just heat and dust and the steady rhythm of hoofbeats that had been his only companion for 6 days. Ironheart, the stallion beneath him, was a magnificent animal despite the circumstances. 17 hands of muscle and spirit coat, the color of wet slate-black mane tangled with dust. The kind of horse men would kill for. The kind of horse Thomas had nearly lost a dozen times in the past months. The only thing of value he still possessed. On the horse's back rode the sum of Thomas's worldly possessions, a worn saddle his father had used, a coil of rope, a bedroll, a canteen that sloshed with the last of yesterday's water, and a small wooden box locked strapped tight to the saddle horn where Thomas could feel it against his thigh with every step. That box held more than objects. It held ghosts. 6 months ago, Thomas Mercer had been the son of a rancher, not a wealthy man, but a man with land, with legacy. The Mercer family ranch in Wyoming had been small 300 acres of decent grazing land in the foothills. His father, William Mercer, had built it from nothing after the war, had raised cattle and broke horses and taught his son everything he knew about both. Then William's heart had stopped one February morning while checking fence posts. Just stopped. The doctor said it was quick, said he didn't suffer, said it like that made a damn bit of difference. What William left behind was a ranch and $3,000 in debt. Thomas had tried. God, he had tried. Worked 18-hour days, sold off cattle, sold off equipment, took loans at rates that should have been criminal. But the numbers did not care how hard a man worked. The numbers just accumulated like snow in a drift, silent and suffocating. The bank foreclosed in June. Thomas remembered that day with a clarity that made his chest tight even now, miles and months removed. Remembered the banker's representative, a thin man in a black suit, who looked at Thomas with something that might have been pity but felt like contempt. Remembered watching them burn the deed to the land. Actually burn it. Some legal formality about clearing the title. Watching his family's name curl and blacken in a small metal basin. His mother had died 5 years earlier. Pneumonia. So there was no one to see Thomas leave. No one to watch him ride away from the only home he'd ever known, with nothing but a horse and a box of his father's belongings. Before William died, he had made Thomas promise something. They'd been sitting on the porch early evening, and William had been unusually quiet. Like he knew. Like some part of him understood his time was short. He'd put his hand on Thomas's shoulder, calloused palm heavy with meaning. "Son," William had said, "this land is the Mercer legacy. Your grandfather broke this ground. Your mother's buried here. Promise me you'll keep it. Promise me you'll fight for it." Thomas had promised. Of course he had promised. What kind of son wouldn't? And then he'd lost it anyway. That failure sat in his chest like a stone. Every step Ironheart took, Thomas felt the weight of that broken promise. His father had trusted him. His father had believed in him. And Thomas had failed. The only thing he'd managed to save was Ironheart. The bank had wanted the horse too, called him an asset, but Thomas had hidden him in a canyon 3 miles from the ranch for the 2 weeks before the foreclosure. Let them think the horse had run off. By the time they figured it out, Thomas was gone. Now he crossed Montana territory with no destination and no plan beyond the cryptic instructions in a letter he'd found in his father's wooden box. The box. Thomas had opened it the 3rd night into his journey, camped by a trickle of water in a draw between 2 hills. Inside were the pieces of William Mercer's life, a certificate from the Territorial Cavalry recognizing his service as a horse trainer, a tintype photograph of Thomas's parents on their wedding day, both of them young and hopeful in a way that hurt to see, and a letter. The envelope was sealed, yellowed with age, marked in William's careful hand. For Thomas, open when you feel lost. Lost was an understatement. Thomas had broken the seal with trembling fingers and unfolded the paper. His father's handwriting precise despite the obvious emotion behind the words. "My son, if you are reading this, I am gone and you are in trouble. I wish I could be there to help. I wish I could have left you more. But I leave you what I can. A skill, a reputation, and a debt owed." The letter went on to explain that 20 years ago William Mercer had saved the life of a man named Nathan Grayson, saved him from a hanging, tracked down the real horse thief and proved Grayson's innocence hours before they would have strung him up in some dusty territorial town. "Nathan Grayson made me a promise," William had written. "He said if I or my kin ever needed help I should come find him. He said he owed me a life debt. I never called it in. Too proud, maybe. But you're not bound by my pride. Go north to Montana Territory. Find Grayson Ranch. It's the largest cattle operation between here and the Canadian line. Tell Nathan who you are. Show him your skill with horses. He'll remember me, and he'll help if he can." The letter ended with words that had burned themselves into Thomas's mind. A man is not defined by what he loses. He is defined by what he builds again. Easy words for a dead man to write, harder words for a living son to believe. But what choice did Thomas have? So he rode north. followed the trail William had sketched on the back of the letter, crossed into Montana territory with summer pressing down and hope wearing thin. The heat was murderous. By midday the air shimmered. Ironheart's coat darkened with sweat. Thomas's shirt clung to his back, salt stains spreading across the fabric. His lips cracked, his eyes burned. The landscape blurred into variations of the same broken emptiness. Water became the only thing that mattered. Thomas read the land the way his father had taught him, looked for the subtle green of vegetation that meant moisture, watched for game trails that always led to water eventually, found small seeps and springs enough to keep him and the horse alive, barely. He caught a jackrabbit in a snare made from rope fibers, cooked it over a fire he built with the last of his matches. The meat was tough and gamey, but it kept him moving. Every night he opened the wooden box, looked at his parents' photograph, read his father's letter again, reminded himself why he was doing this, because a Mercer did not quit. A Mercer did not lie down and die in the dirt. A Mercer built again. On the seventh day, as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Thomas saw buildings in the distance, not many, not prosperous-looking, just the skeletal outline of what had once been a town. As he drew closer, he saw the sign, weathered wood hanging from one chain, the other long since broken. The letters were faded but still legible. Redemption. The irony was not lost on Thomas. The town was dead, not dying, dead, past tense, finished. The building stood empty with windows like hollow eye sockets, a saloon with doors hanging crooked on rusted hinges, a general store with the front window broken out, a blacksmith shop with the forge cold and full of dust. Everything painted in shades of gray and brown, bleached by sun and scoured by wind. In the center of the town square stood a gallows. The wood was old, but still solid, still functional. The noose hung empty, swaying slightly in the hot breeze. A reminder of frontier justice, of quick trials and quicker executions, of a time when law was whatever the strongest men said it was. Thomas guided Ironheart toward the well near the gallows. He approached carefully, not sure if the structure would even hold. The rope was frayed, the bucket gone. Thomas used his own rope and a tin cup from his saddlebag, lowering it into darkness. When he pulled it up, the cup held maybe 3 inches of water, cloudy, tasting of minerals and old wood, but it was water. He let Ironheart drink first, lowered the cup 6 times until the horse had enough to settle. Then Thomas drank. The water was warm and gritty, but it felt like salvation sliding down his throat. He decided to make camp here. At least there was water. At least there was shelter from the wind. Thomas gathered scraps of wood from a collapsed porch. The boards broke in his hands with a dry snap like old bones. He built a small fire in the dirt using his second-to-last match, cupped the flame with both hands until it caught. As the sun set, painting the dead town in shades of orange and purple, Thomas sat by the fire and felt the full weight of his isolation press down on him. No one knew where he was. No one would miss him if he died out here. He was completely, utterly alone. That was when he heard the horse. Thomas's hand moved to the rifle beside him, fingers closing around the stock. He stayed low, stayed quiet, eyes scanning the darkening street. A rider appeared from between 2 buildings, moving slow. No hurry, no aggression in the posture. An old man, maybe 60, maybe 70, hard to tell in the fading light. He sat his horse like someone who'd spent a lifetime in the saddle. Wore a black suit, dusty but well made, a broad hat, saddlebags that looked full. The man stopped 30 feet away, raised his hands slightly showing they were empty. "Evening," the man said. His voice was rough but educated. "Mind if I share your fire?" Thomas kept his hand on the rifle but nodded. "Come ahead. Slow." The man dismounted with the careful movements of someone whose joints protested sudden motion. He led his horse to the well, watered it, then walked toward Thomas's fire with his hands visible. Up close, Thomas could see him better. Weathered face with deep lines around the eyes. Neatly trimmed beard going white. The black suit was quality fabric tailored. This was not a drifter. This was a professional of some kind. "Name's Walter Brennan," the man said. He settled onto a rock across the fire without asking permission, confident in the universal law of the trail that said a man could share a fire once invited. "I'm a lawyer. Travel the territory handling land disputes and estate settlements." "Thomas Mercer," Thomas replied. He did not offer more. Walter pulled out a pipe, began the slow ritual of packing and lighting it. "You look like a man who's running from something," he said conversationally. "Or running to something. Hard to tell which sometimes." "Not running," Thomas said. His voice was rough from disuse. He'd barely spoken in a week. "Looking." "Looking for what?" Thomas hesitated, then figured what did it matter? This stranger would be gone by morning. "Nathan Grayson. You know him." Walter's hand stopped moving. The pipe hung halfway to his lips. His eyes found Thomas's face in the firelight, suddenly sharp and focused. "Nathan Grayson," Walter repeated slowly. "Yes, I know him. Most feared rancher in 3 territories." He paused. "But more important, what's your name again?" "Thomas Mercer." Walter set down his pipe. His whole body had gone still in a way that made Thomas's instincts prickle. "William Mercer's boy." The question hit Thomas like a physical blow. "You knew my father." "I did." Walter's voice had changed, gone careful. "And I know why you're here." Thomas leaned forward. "Then tell me." "Because I've been riding blind for a week on nothing but a letter and a prayer." Walter studied him for a long moment, then he nodded as if making a decision. "Your father saved Nathan Grayson's life 20 years ago, 1865. "I know that much," Thomas said. "My father's letter told me. Said Grayson owed him a debt." "The letter doesn't tell you everything," Walter said. "Let me fill in what William left out." The old lawyer settled back, eyes distant with memory. Summer of 1865, just after the war ended. Montana was still wild territory. Law was whatever the local sheriff said it was, and most sheriffs were more interested in keeping order than finding truth. Nathan Grayson was 25 years old then, young, ambitious, had just started building what would become the biggest ranch in the territory, but he was nobody yet, just another cowhand trying to make his way. Someone stole 3 horses from a freight company. Good horses, valuable. The sheriff found them in a canyon near where Nathan was camped. Nathan said he didn't steal them, said someone was setting him up, but nobody believed him. Walter's voice dropped. They were going to hang him, had the rope ready, had him on the gallows in a town not much different from this one. Thomas felt his chest tighten imagining it. "Your father was there by chance," Walter continued. "He'd been working as a tracker for the territorial marshal. Happened to be passing through. Heard about the hanging. Something about it didn't sit right with him. So he went and looked at the evidence. Took him 3 days. 3 days of following tracks, checking horseshoes, talking to witnesses the sheriff hadn't bothered with. And he found the real thieves. 2 brothers working a freight route. Found the horses they were planning to sell in the next town over. Brought them back just in time. Nathan was standing on the gallows with the noose around his neck when William rode in with the real thieves in custody." Walter's eyes met Thomas's. "I was Nathan's lawyer then. Fresh out of some eastern school, thought I could make my name on the frontier. I watched your father save an innocent man's life, and I watched Nathan Grayson make a promise. Nathan looked at William Mercer and said, 'I owe you everything. If you or your kin ever need anything, you come find me. I don't care what it is or when it is. I'll help you.'" Thomas's throat felt tight. His father had never told him the full story, had never explained how close Nathan had come to death. "Why didn't my father ever collect on that debt?" "Pride," Walter said simply. "William was a proud man, self-sufficient. He built his ranch from nothing, and he wanted to keep it that way. Didn't want to owe anyone, didn't want to feel like he was cashing in on a good deed." "But he left you the letter," Walter continued, "which means he knew you might need help someday, and he trusted Nathan Grayson to keep his word." "Where is Grayson now?" Thomas asked. 2 days north of here, Grayson Ranch. You can't miss it. Biggest operation in Montana territory. Thousands of acres, hundreds of cattle, dozens of hands. Walter paused. But you need to understand something, Thomas. Nathan is not the same man your father saved. Thomas felt a chill despite the fire's heat. What do you mean? 15 years ago there was a fire at the ranch. The main house burned to the ground. Walter's voice went soft with old sorrow. Nathan's wife died in that fire, Catherine. Good woman, and his son. Boy was 7 years old. Name was Thomas, same as you. The coincidence of the name felt like a weight settling on Thomas's shoulders. They found Catherine's body, Walter said. But the boy, they never found him. Nathan searched for months, assumed he'd run off in terror and died in the wilderness. Montana is not forgiving to a child alone. Nathan blamed himself. Still does, I suspect. He was in the barn when the fire started. By the time he got to the house, it was too late. He got Catherine out, but she'd already breathed too much smoke, died in his arms. The boy was just gone. Walter's eyes reflected the firelight. Nathan closed up after that, shut down, rebuilt the ranch, but not himself. He's cold now, hard, fair but distant. Men respect him, but they don't love him. He doesn't let anyone close. Why are you telling me this? Thomas asked. Because you need to know what you're walking into, Walter said. You can't show up asking for favors based on an old debt. Nathan will send you away. He doesn't do charity, doesn't trade on sentiment. Then what do I do? You prove your worth, Walter said firmly. Your father's letter mentioned your skill with horses. Is that true? Can you actually train them? Thomas thought of Ironheart, thought of the dozens of horses he'd gentled on his father's ranch, thought of cavalry officers who'd paid premium prices for Mercer-trained mounts. Yes, he said quietly. I can train horses better than most men you'll find. Then that's your in, Walter said. Nathan's been looking for a good horse trainer for 2 years, turned away a dozen men. Too rough, too slow, not skilled enough. He's particular, demanding. Walter leaned forward. You go there and you offer your skill, not your father's debt, not your hard luck story, your skill. Show him what you can do. If you're as good as William was, Nathan will hire you. And once you're in, once you've proven yourself, then maybe you can talk about the rest. Thomas absorbed this. It made sense. But it also meant everything rested on him, on his ability, on one chance to prove himself to the most feared rancher in 3 territories. What if I'm not good enough? Thomas asked quietly. Walter smiled sadly. Then you ride on and find another way. But your father believed in you enough to point you here. I suggest you believe in yourself at least that much. The old lawyer stood, joints creaking. I'm headed to the next town. Need to be there by noon tomorrow. I'll leave at first light. He paused, then reached into his coat and pulled out a small card. This has the exact location of Grayson Ranch. 2 days north, maybe less if you push. When you get there, don't mention me. Don't mention your father. Not yet. Just ask for work as a horse trainer. Thomas took the card, studied the neat handwriting. Why are you helping me? Because I owed your father a debt too, Walter said. He taught me that law isn't always justice, that sometimes you have to look beyond the easy answer. Made me a better lawyer. He touched his hat. Besides, I'd like to see Nathan Grayson get a second chance at something. He's been dead inside for too long. Walter walked to his bedroll, settled in across the fire. Within minutes, his breathing deepened into sleep. Thomas sat awake, staring into the flames. He pulled out his father's wooden box again, looked at the photograph, read the letter one more time by firelight. A man is not defined by what he loses. He is defined by what he builds again. Tomorrow he would ride to Grayson Ranch. Tomorrow he would put everything on the line. His last chance, his only chance. Tomorrow he would find out if he was William Mercer's son in more than just name. The fire burned down to coals, and Thomas finally slept dreamless and exhausted. He woke to find Walter already gone. Only hoof prints in the dust remained. Thomas saddled Ironheart in the gray pre-dawn light, filled his canteen from the well, turned the stallion north, and rode toward whatever waited for him at the end of this desperate gamble. The land changed as he traveled, slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. The broken badlands gave way to rolling grassland. The vegetation thickened. He crossed a creek, clear water running over smooth stones, saw antelope in the distance, saw birds. This was better land, richer land, the kind of land that could support cattle and horses, the kind of land men fought over. Late in the afternoon of the second day, Thomas crested a rise and stopped. Below him, spread across a wide valley, was Grayson Ranch. It was not a ranch, it was an empire. The main house sat on a low hill, a two-story structure built of stone and timber, solid, permanent, built to last generations. A wide porch wrapped around the front, offering shade and commanding views of everything below. Around the main house, the ranch sprawled like a small town, a long bunkhouse for the hands, a massive barn bigger than some churches Thomas had seen, corrals holding dozens of horses, a blacksmith forge with smoke rising from the chimney, outbuildings for storage for equipment for all the 1,000 necessities of running a major cattle operation. Fences ran in straight lines for miles. Cattle dotted the grassland like brown stones scattered across green fabric. Thomas counted at least 30 horses in the corrals, maybe more, and surrounding it all, defining the boundary between wild land and claimed land, ran a fence of black iron posts and wire. At the property entrance stood a gate, heavy, imposing, black iron with pointed tops that looked almost like spearheads. Above the gate, a wooden arch bore the ranch name carved deep into the wood. Grayson Ranch. Thomas's hands tightened on the reins. His mouth went dry. This was it, the moment everything came down to, the test his father had pointed him toward. He touched his heels to Ironheart's sides and rode down the slope toward the gate. As he approached, he saw the gate was closed, locked, a chain and padlock securing it. Beyond the gate, the ranch operated with quiet efficiency. Men moved between buildings. Horses shifted in corrals. Smoke rose from the forge. Thomas stopped at the gate, waited. He was visible from the main house. Someone would come. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then a young man rode out from near the barn, maybe 20 years old, cocky in the saddle. He pulled up on the other side of the gate and looked down at Thomas with the casual arrogance of someone who belonged looking at someone who clearly did not. "What do you want?" the young man asked. Thomas kept his voice steady, respectful. "I'm here to see Mr. Grayson." The young man almost laughed. "The boss doesn't see every saddle tramp that rides up to the gate." Thomas absorbed the insult without reacting. "Tell him Thomas Mercer is here. I'm a horse trainer, looking for work." The young man's eyes flicked to Ironheart. Despite the dust and travel wear, the stallion was obviously a quality animal. Well-built, well-trained, the kind of horse that suggested its owner knew what he was doing. "Wait here," the young man said. He turned and rode toward the main house at a lazy trot. Thomas waited. The sun pressed down. Ironheart shifted beneath him, sensing his tension. Thomas stroked the horse's neck, murmuring low words of comfort. Minutes crawled past. Then the main house door opened. The entire ranch seemed to go quiet. Men working in the corrals stopped. Conversation died. Even the horses settled. A man stepped onto the porch and began walking toward the gate. Thomas knew immediately this was Nathan Grayson. He did not walk fast, did not rush. His pace was measured and deliberate. The walk of a man who had never needed to hurry because everything waited for him. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, broad across the shoulders in a way that spoke of years of hard physical work. He wore simple clothes, plain shirt, canvas pants, worn boots, no fancy gun belt, no silver conchos or tooled leather. Everything about him was practical, functional, built for use, not show. His face was weathered by sun and wind and time, maybe 45. Hard to tell. Lines around his eyes and mouth, gray threading through dark hair. But it was the eyes that caught Thomas. Storm gray, cold, assessing. The eyes of a man who had seen too much and felt too little. Nathan stopped 6 feet from the gate, looked at Thomas the way a buyer might look at a horse at auction. taking inventory, judging value. His gaze traveled over Thomas's worn boots, his dusty clothes, his young face marked with travel and hardship, then to Ironheart, then back to Thomas. The silence stretched. Thomas felt his heart hammering against his ribs. Everything depended on the next minute. Everything. Finally Nathan spoke. His voice was low, flat, final. "We give nothing away here." The words hit like a slap. Thomas saw Nathan's posture shift slightly, saw him beginning to turn away, saw the door of opportunity starting to close. Panic surged through Thomas's chest. He could not let this happen, could not ride 1,000 miles just to be dismissed in 30 seconds. His voice came out rough, desperate, honest. "I'm not asking for charity, sir." The words tumbled out. "I know I don't look like much. I know I'm just another drifter to you." Nathan paused. Did not turn back, but did not walk away either. Thomas swallowed hard. "But I can work with horses better than any man you'll find." Now Nathan turned, slowly. His cold eyes found Thomas's face. Something flickered there. Interest, maybe, or curiosity. Hard to tell. "Prove it," Nathan said. 2 words. No preamble, no explanation. Just a command. Nathan turned to the young ranch hand who'd fetched him. "Leo, bring out Diablo." Leo's face went pale. "Boss, you sure that horse put Marcus in bed for a week? Broke his arm?" Nathan ignored him. His eyes stayed on Thomas. "That horse has killed 1 man and injured 3 others. I've been about to shoot him for 6 months, but I keep hoping maybe he's salvageable." He pointed toward the largest corral. "If you can get a saddle on him without ropes or force without getting yourself killed, you have a job. You have 1 chance." Thomas swung down from Ironheart. His legs almost buckled after days in the saddle, but he forced them steady. "Yes, sir." Leo opened the gate just enough for Thomas to slip through, then closed and locked it behind him. Thomas noticed other ranch hands gathering, drawn by the spectacle. The new guy trying to tame Diablo. This was entertainment. They brought the horse out from a separate pen. Thomas heard him before he saw him. The scream of an animal pushed past reason, the crash of hooves against wood. Then he saw him. Diablo was massive, 17 hands if he was an inch, black as coal, muscles bunched and rolling under his coat, eyes white rimmed with fear and rage. Foam flecked his mouth. His ears were pinned flat to his skull. They'd used 3 ropes to move him to the main corral, handlers keeping distance ready to bolt if he charged. The moment they released the ropes and scrambled over the fence, Diablo exploded. Bucking, spinning, screaming his fury at the sky. Thomas stood very still outside the corral watching. Nathan came to stand beside him. "No one can ride him. No one can even get near him. He was beaten before I bought him. Maybe tortured. I thought I could rehabilitate him, but I was wrong. If you can't handle him, I'm putting him down tomorrow." Thomas did not answer. He was studying the horse with complete focus. Watched how Diablo moved. Watched the pattern of his panic. Watched his eyes. Watched his ears. Watched everything. After 5 full minutes, Thomas saw it. A scar on Diablo's left flank. Old, raised, the kind of scar that came from a whip or a hot brand applied with deliberate cruelty. "He's not mean," Thomas said quietly. "He's terrified." Nathan said nothing, but Thomas sensed the older man listening. Thomas climbed the fence, slow and easy, dropped into the corral without sudden movement. Diablo was at the far end, pawing and snorting. Thomas did not approach directly, did not make eye contact, just started walking a slow circle around the perimeter of the corral, not toward the horse, not away, just moving in a steady rhythm. He began to speak, low, constant, a murmur of sound more than words. "Easy now. Nobody's going to hurt you, not anymore. You're safe here. I've got you." The tone mattered more than the content, the rhythm, the lack of threat. Diablo watched him, still agitated but confused. This human was not attacking, not cornering, not threatening. Thomas kept walking, kept talking, slowed his breathing to match the horse's heaving sides, an old trick his father had taught him. Animals could sense the rhythm of your heartbeat. If you were calm, they could become calm. 5 minutes. 10. Thomas just walked and breathed and spoke softly. Gradually, Diablo's ears came forward. Just a fraction. His pawing slowed. He watched Thomas with less white showing in his eyes. Thomas changed his pattern, angled slightly closer with each circuit, not directly at the horse, but narrowing the distance inch by inch. Diablo snorted, stamped, but did not bolt. Closer, closer. Thomas could see the ranch hands gathered at the fence now, silent, watching. This was not how you broke a horse. This was something else. Finally, Thomas was close enough to extend his hand, palm up, non-threatening. He stopped moving, just stood, breathing, waiting. Diablo's nostrils flared, testing the air, testing this strange human who spoke soft and moved slow and did not hurt. A minute passed. 2. Then Diablo took one step forward, just one. His muzzle stretched toward Thomas's hand, sniffed, once, twice. Thomas did not move, did not grab, did not rush. Just let the horse investigate. Let him make the choice. Diablo's nose touched Thomas's palm, soft as a whisper. "That's it," Thomas murmured. "That's a good boy. See, nobody's going to hurt you." Slowly, carefully, Thomas raised his other hand, moved it toward Diablo's neck. The horse's eyes tracked the movement, but he did not pull away. Thomas's fingers touched the sleek coat, felt the tremor of muscle beneath, felt the heat and the fear and the desperate need for kindness. He stroked, gentle, slow, his father's hands moving through him, decades of knowledge and patience and respect for these magnificent creatures. "Mr. Grayson," Thomas called out, not looking away from the horse. "This horse was beaten, badly. Look at that scar on his left flank." He heard Nathan move closer to the fence. "He's not wild," Thomas continued. "He's protecting himself. He's learned that humans cause pain. We have to teach him different." Thomas stood with his hand on Diablo's neck for another 10 minutes, just standing, just touching, letting trust build molecule by molecule. Finally he stepped back, looked at Nathan. "I won't ride him today." Surprise flickered across Nathan's face. "Why not?" "Because trust isn't built in an hour. It's built over time." Thomas's voice was firm, certain. "I can ride him, but if I do it now, I'll break something we just started building. Give me a week. I'll have him gentle as a lamb." Nathan studied Thomas for a long moment. His expression was unreadable. Then he nodded, once, sharp. "Leo, show him the bunkhouse." Nathan's eyes stayed on Thomas. "You have 1 week. You get Diablo rideable, you stay. You fail, you leave with nothing." He turned to walk away, stopped, did not look back. "What was your father's name?" Thomas's breath caught. "William Mercer, sir." Nathan's shoulders tightened, a visible tension that ran through his whole body. A long pause. Then quietly, "I see." He walked away without another word. Thomas stood in the corral with his hand still resting on Diablo's neck, feeling the horse's heartbeat slow beneath his palm, and wondered what he had just gotten himself into. The first week passed in a rhythm older than civilization. Wake before dawn. Work until your body screamed. Sleep hard and dreamless. Wake and do it again. Thomas spent those 7 days with Diablo building trust the way you might build a cathedral. 1 stone at a time, patient, deliberate, no shortcuts. Day 1 and 2 he simply existed in the horse's space, fed him, brushed him with long steady strokes, checked his hooves, spoke in that low, constant murmur that seemed to calm something deep in the animal's chest. The other ranch hands watched from a distance, skeptical. They'd seen men try to gentle Diablo before, seen those men leave on stretchers. By day 3, Thomas could lead Diablo around the corral on a loose rope, not pulling, not forcing, just suggesting direction and having the horse choose to follow. It was a small miracle, and the men began to take notice. Day 4 brought the saddle. Thomas let Diablo sniff it, investigate it, understand it was not a threat. Then, moving with glacial slowness, he laid a blanket across the horse's back. Diablo tensed, but did not bolt. Thomas left the blanket there for an hour, just standing, just being. Day 5. The saddle went on. Diablo shuddered and stamped, but Thomas's hand on his neck kept him steady, kept him calm. The cinch tightened gradually over the course of 2 hours. By evening, Diablo wore a full saddle and seemed almost comfortable. Day 6. Thomas put his weight on the saddle, leaning, not mounting, just letting Diablo feel the pressure, adjust to it, accept it. The horse's eyes stayed calm, his ears forward. On the 7th day, as the sun rose golden over the Montana hills, Thomas swung into the saddle. Diablo's muscles bunched. His whole body went rigid with old memory, old fear. But Thomas sat quiet, did not kick, did not spur, did not demand, just sat and breathed and waited. A minute passed, 2. The horse stood trembling beneath him. Then Diablo took 1 step forward. Thomas barely touched the reins, just a whisper of suggestion. The horse walked, slow, uncertain, but walking, responding, trusting. By the time Nathan Grayson walked out to the corral an hour later, Thomas had Diablo trotting smooth circles. The horse's ears were forward. His gait was even. The wild rage that had defined him for months was simply gone, replaced by something that looked almost like contentment. Nathan stood at the fence and watched in silence. His face gave nothing away, but Thomas saw his hands tighten on the top rail, saw something flicker in those cold gray eyes. Thomas brought Diablo to a stop near the fence, dismounted slowly, patted the horse's neck. "He's ready, sir," Thomas said quietly. Nathan's eyes moved from the horse to Thomas, studied him like he was seeing him for the first time. "I've watched a lot of men break horses," Nathan said. His voice was rough, like the words cost him something. "You're not a breaker. You're a healer." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Your father taught you well." It was the first acknowledgement of the connection between them, the first crack in Nathan's wall. "You stay," Nathan said. $40 a month, room and board. You'll train all new horses. Handle the breeding program." He paused. "Prove yourself for 6 months. We'll talk about a percentage." Thomas felt his chest tighten. $40 a month was good money, more than good. It was a lifeline, a future. "What about the debt, sir?" Thomas asked carefully. "My father's debt." Nathan's face went hard again, shut down. "We'll talk about that when you've earned the right. Right now you're just a hired hand. Understand?" "Yes, sir." Nathan turned to leave, then stopped. "The bunkhouse is the long building east of the barn. Leo will show you which bunk is open. Meals are at 6 noon and 6. Don't be late." He walked away, and Thomas stood there with Diablo's reins in his hand, feeling the weight of what he'd just accomplished settle over him like a coat. He had a job. He had a place. It was not ownership. It was not partnership. But it was a start. It was something to build from. The bunkhouse was a long, low building with a tin roof and walls made of rough-cut lumber. Inside it smelled of sweat and wood smoke and the particular musk of men who worked hard for a living. A dozen bunks lined the walls. Most were occupied by the sleeping forms of ranch hands who worked the night shift. A few were empty. Leo, the young ranch hand who'd first met Thomas at the gate, pointed to an empty bunk near the back. "That one's yours. Belonged to Marcus before Diablo put him in bed. He won't be needing it anymore." Took his pay and headed to California. Thomas set his few belongings on the thin mattress. His father's wooden box, his bedroll, a change of clothes. It looked pathetic spread out like that. Everything he owned in the world fitting into a space 3 feet by 6. "Dinner's in an hour," Leo said. He hesitated at the door. "That thing you did with Diablo, that was something. Most of us figured you'd be dead by day 3. "Most horses aren't mean," Thomas said. "They're just scared." Leo nodded slowly. "Maybe, but you still got skill." He grinned. "Welcome to Grayson Ranch, Mercer. Try not to die." The next 3 months passed in a blur of work that felt like redemption. Thomas threw himself into the job with an intensity that surprised even him. He woke before the other hands and worked past sunset. Trained 12 horses in those first months, young stock mostly, colts and fillies that needed gentling before they could be sold or put to work. Every one of them responded to his patient methods. Every one of them sold for premium prices at the territorial market. Nathan noticed. The breeding program had been neglected for years, random pairings based on convenience rather than strategy. Thomas changed that. He studied bloodlines, matched stallions to mares based on temperament and conformation, kept detailed records in a ledger Nathan provided. Within 2 months, the quality of foals being born showed visible improvement. The ranch hands respected competence above all else. Thomas proved his competence daily. They began to trust him, ask his advice, include him in the quiet conversations that happened after dinner when the day's work was done. He learned their names, their stories. Leo was the youngest, barely 20, eager to prove himself. Jebediah was the oldest at 55, a former cavalry sergeant who'd seen action in the Indian Wars and carried the scars to prove it. Marcus had left, but there were others. Tom, Jesse, Robert the blacksmith, good men, hard men, the kind who judged you by your work and nothing else. Thomas saved every penny of his $40 a month, kept it in his father's wooden box under his bunk, had no idea what he was saving for, just knew that a Mercer did not spend foolishly. A Mercer prepared, a Mercer built toward something. One evening in late October, 3 months after Thomas arrived, Nathan called him to the main house. Thomas had never been inside. The hands ate in the bunkhouse. Nathan took his meals alone in the big house on the hill. The separation was absolute. The house was solid, stone foundation, timber walls, built to withstand Montana winters. Inside it was sparse, functional furniture, no decoration, no warmth. Just the necessities of living arranged in rooms that felt empty despite being occupied. Nathan's office was on the first floor, a large room with a desk covered in ledgers and maps. The walls held framed documents, deeds, contracts, the legal scaffolding of the empire Nathan had built. Nathan sat behind the desk and gestured for Thomas to take the chair across from him. "Your work is profitable," he said without preamble. "The horses sell faster, higher prices, 40% increase over last year." Thomas said nothing, waited. "I'm raising your wage to $55 a month. After 6 months total, we'll discuss partnership percentage." $55. Thomas's throat went tight. That was real money. Saving money. "Thank you, sir." Nathan's eyes found his. "Your father." The debt he was owed. Nathan's voice went quieter. "We'll talk about that. Soon. But not yet." "I understand." Thomas stood to leave, but Nathan stopped him. "One more thing. There's a man who works for me, Samuel Hayes. You've probably seen him around." Thomas nodded. He'd seen Samuel. Hard not to notice him. Tall man, mid-20s, always wore a gun low on his hip like he knew how to use it. Never spoke. Not to anyone. "Samuel is mute," Nathan said. "Throat injury years ago, but he's the best hand I've got. Loyal, capable. I trust him more than any man on this ranch." Nathan paused, choosing his words carefully. "He was there the night of the fire, the night my wife and son died. He tried to save them, nearly died himself in the attempt. That's how he lost his voice." Thomas felt something cold settle in his stomach. This was important. Nathan did not share personal information casually. "Samuel stays because he feels he owes me," Nathan continued. "I stay because he's the only person who understands what that night took from me." His eyes met Thomas's. "I'm telling you this because Samuel has been watching you work. He respects skill, and he doesn't respect many people." "Why are you telling me this, sir?" "Because you're going to need allies," Nathan said. "Things are getting complicated. There's trouble coming. When it does, I need to know who I can count on." Before Thomas could ask what he meant, Nathan dismissed him with a wave. "That's all. Get some rest." Thomas left the office with more questions than answers. That night he stayed late in the stable checking on a mare who was close to foaling. The work was peaceful, quiet, just him and the horses and the smell of hay and leather. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to find Samuel Hayes standing in the doorway. Up close, Samuel was intimidating. 6 feet of lean muscle, scars visible on his throat where something had burned deep. His eyes were dark and watchful, but not hostile, just careful. Samuel made a gesture, pointed to the mare, made a motion like writing. Thomas understood. "You want to watch?" Samuel nodded. "Sure, company's welcome." They worked in comfortable silence. Thomas checked the mare's vitals. Samuel fetched fresh water and hay without being asked. 2 men who understood horses and didn't need words to coordinate. After an hour, Samuel pulled out a small slate board and chalk, the kind children used in schools. He wrote in neat script and held it up. "You work like someone who cares." Thomas read it and nodded. "My father taught me to respect the animals, said they give us their strength and their trust. Least we can do is treat them right." Samuel erased and wrote again. "Your father sounds like a good man." He was. They fell back into silence, but it felt different now, like a door had opened between them. Over the next week, Samuel became Thomas's shadow. Not intrusive, just present. They developed a shorthand. Samuel would write questions. Thomas would answer. Sometimes they just worked side by side, communicating in the universal language of men who knew their craft. One evening, as they finished grooming the horses, Samuel wrote something longer than usual, held up the slate with obvious hesitation. "Mr. Grayson had a son, same age I was when I started working here. Boy loved horses, loved this ranch. Night of the fire he disappeared, never found." Thomas read it slowly. "Nathan told me some of it." Samuel erased and wrote more. "Boss thinks the boy died, thinks he ran into the wilderness and perished. But no body was ever found." He paused, then added in smaller letters, "I was there that night. I searched for days, never found a trace, not a footprint, not a scrap of clothing, nothing." "That must haunt you," Thomas said quietly. Samuel's eyes met his. He wrote, "Every day. If I'd been here instead of town, if I'd been faster, maybe." "You can't carry that," Thomas said. "Sometimes things happen that no one can prevent." Samuel stared at the words on his slate, then erased them all and wrote just 2 words. "You understand." And Thomas did. He understood guilt, understood the weight of failure, understood what it meant to carry a burden that had no resolution. They stood in the dim stable, 2 men connected by loss they could not fix and work they could not abandon, and something like friendship settled between them. The first snow came in early November, light, beautiful, coating the ranch in white that made everything look clean and new. That was the day Margaret Grayson arrived. Thomas was working in the corral when he heard the wagon, looked up to see a buggy rolling through the gate. Black lacquered sides, good horses pulling it, the kind of conveyance that spoke of money and status. A woman sat in the driver's seat, older, maybe 55, dressed entirely in black despite the years that had surely passed since mourning would be expected. Her face was sharp, lined with the kind of hardness that came from old grief calcified into permanent bitterness. She drove the buggy up to the main house and Nathan emerged to meet her. Thomas could not hear the conversation, but he saw Nathan's body language, tense, uncomfortable. This was not a welcome visit. The woman was Margaret Grayson, Nathan's younger sister. Thomas learned this from Leo, who seemed to know everything that happened on the ranch. "That's Miss Margaret," Leo said, voice low. "She lost her husband and her son in the same fire that took Mr. Grayson's family. They lived together in the old main house. When it burned, she got out, but they didn't." "She blames Nathan?" Thomas asked. "She blames everyone. Herself for surviving, Nathan for not maintaining the fireplaces better, God for letting it happen." Leo shook his head. "She's been bitter for 15 years. Comes around once or twice a year to make everyone miserable." Thomas went back to work figuring family drama was none of his business. He was wrong. That afternoon, as Thomas led a young gelding through training exercises, he heard raised voices from the main house. The windows were open despite the cold and sound carried. Margaret's voice sharp as broken glass. "Who is that young man in the corral?" Nathan's response lower but still audible. "New horse trainer. Best I've found in years." "What's his name?" A pause, then Nathan careful. "Thomas Mercer." The silence that followed was heavy enough to feel from 100 yards away. Then Margaret's voice rising with anger. "Mercer, as in William Mercer. And you hired him." Thomas's hands stilled on the lead rope. "Yes," Nathan said, "after what his father did." Margaret's voice cracked. "After William Mercer killed my family." The words hit Thomas like a physical blow. The gelding sensed his distress and shied sideways, but Thomas barely noticed. His ears were ringing. His vision had narrowed to a tunnel. "Margaret, stop!" Nathan's voice was firm, commanding. "No, I won't stop. William Mercer installed those heating systems. William Mercer's faulty work caused the fire. William Mercer killed my son, killed my husband, killed your wife and your boy." "It was an accident," Nathan said. "Was it? Or was he paid to make it look like an accident? The insurance investigators said the design was flawed, said the chimney backdraft was inevitable with that configuration." Thomas could not breathe, could not think. His father caused the fire that killed Nathan's family, Margaret's family, everything. "That's enough," Nathan said, steel in his voice now. "William is dead. He can't defend himself. And I won't have you speak ill of a man who once saved my life." "He saved your life so he could take it more slowly," Margaret spat. "And now you hire his son. Are you mad? What are you planning, Nathan? Are you going to give him part of this ranch, reward him for his father's murder?" "I haven't decided anything." "You should send him away, now, before he destroys what little we have left." Their voices dropped. Thomas could not hear the rest of the conversation, did not want to. He stood frozen in the corral, the gelding forgotten the world spinning around him. His father caused the fire. His father killed Nathan's wife and child. His father killed Margaret's family. Everything he thought he knew, everything his father had been, the good man, the honest man, the man who saved Nathan Grayson from hanging, all of it stained with this, tainted by this. Thomas's legs moved without his permission. He tied the gelding quickly and stumbled toward the stable, needed to think, needed to understand. He found Samuel there mucking stalls. One look at Thomas's face and Samuel set down his pitchfork, pulled out his slate. "What happened?" "Tell me about the fire," Thomas said, voice rough. "Tell me everything." Samuel's face went carefully neutral. He wrote slowly. "Why?" "Because Margaret just told Nathan that my father caused it, that William Mercer's work killed everyone." Samuel closed his eyes briefly. Then he began to write. It took several slatefuls. Thomas read each one as Samuel erased and started again. 15 years ago. William Mercer came to install new heating systems for the ranch. The old house had been freezing in winter. Nathan hired William based on his reputation as a skilled metalworker and blacksmith. William designed and installed new fireplaces and furnaces throughout the main house. State-of-the-art for the time, expensive. 1 month after installation, the fire happened. Winter night, dry wind. The fire started in the main house chimney around midnight, spread with terrifying speed. The new system had a flaw. A backdraft in the chimney design that allowed sparks to escape into the walls. By the time anyone noticed, the whole structure was engulfed. Nathan's wife, Catherine, died from smoke inhalation. Margaret's husband died trying to get people out. Margaret's 5-year-old son was never found. Nathan's 7-year-old son was never found. 5 people dead or missing. The house destroyed. Everything lost. Investigation afterward showed the chimney design was faulty. William Mercer's work was blamed. There was talk of a lawsuit, of criminal charges. There was talk of a lawsuit, of criminal charges. But before any legal action could proceed, the insurance company quietly paid out part of the claim, and the territorial prosecutor declined to file charges citing insufficient evidence of criminal negligence. William Mercer lived with that blame for 15 years. It destroyed his reputation as a craftsman, drove away customers, left him struggling with debt until his death in 1885. Heart attack. Those who knew him said the shame killed him as much as his failing heart. Nathan never publicly blamed William, never spoke against him. But he never spoke to him again either. The man who had saved his life had inadvertently destroyed it. Samuel's final slate said simply, "Nathan doesn't blame your father, but Margaret does. She needs someone to blame or the grief will eat her alive." Thomas sank onto a hay bale. His hands were shaking. Was it really an accident? Or did my father? Could he have? Samuel shook his head firmly, wrote, "Your father was not a saboteur. He was a craftsman. He made a mistake, a fatal one, but not a malicious one." "How do you know?" "Because I knew him. He came back after the fire, before he died, came to see the damage, to try to understand what went wrong. I saw his face. That was not the face of a murderer. That was the face of a man destroyed by his own failure." Thomas put his head in his hands. Everything was complicated now. The debt his father had spoken of, the help Nathan had promised, it was all entangled with death and guilt and tragedy. "I should leave," Thomas said. "I should get out before I make this worse." Samuel grabbed his arm, wrote urgently, "No, stay. Nathan hired you knowing who you were. He's trying to find balance, trying to make something right out of something terrible. If you leave now, you rob him of that chance. But Margaret will heal or she won't. But you running away won't help anyone. Stay, work. Prove that the Mercer name can build as well as destroy." Thomas looked into Samuel's dark eyes and saw certainty there, saw something he desperately needed, belief. "All right," Thomas said quietly. "I'll stay, but I'm not taking anything I haven't earned. You understand, no charity, no debt payment, just work." Samuel nodded and wrote, "That's all Nathan wants to give anyway." Over the next weeks, tension simmered on the ranch. Margaret stayed in the guest room of the main house, appeared at meals, watched Thomas with cold eyes full of accusation. She never spoke to him directly, just observed, judged. Let her presence be a constant reminder of what his father had done. Thomas bore it, worked harder, stayed later, proved his value through action rather than words. The other hands noticed, respected it. Leo started defending Thomas when Margaret's accusations became too public. "He's not his father, and he's damn good at his job." Even Jebediah, the hard old cavalry sergeant, grunted approval. "Man shouldn't be punished for his father's sins, not if he's making his own way." But the real trouble came from outside the ranch. His name was Crawford Pike, and he owned the neighboring property to the east, a smaller operation, maybe 1,000 acres where Nathan had 5,000. But Pike was ambitious, hungry, and getting desperate. Thomas first encountered him in late November. He was working in the far pasture checking fence lines when 3 riders approached. They wore the hard look of men used to taking what they wanted. The leader was older, maybe 40, thick through the chest, face weathered and mean. He sat his horse like he owned the ground beneath it. "You're the new horse trainer," the man said. Not a question. Thomas straightened hand, moving casually to the rifle on his saddle. "That's right. Heard Grayson hired William Mercer's boy." The man's smile did not reach his eyes. "That's ironic. Mercer working for the man his daddy killed." Thomas's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. "It was an accident." "Was it?" Crawford leaned forward in his saddle. "Or did someone pay William to make sure that fire happened? Lot of money in insurance claims. Lot of money in a big ranch suddenly vulnerable." The implication was clear, disgusting. "My father was an honest man." "Sure he was. That's why he died in debt with nothing to his name." Crawford's voice dripped contempt. "You're here begging for scraps from the man your father murdered. Must be hard swallowing that much pride." Thomas's hand tightened on the rifle stock. "You need to leave." "I'll leave when I'm ready." Crawford gestured to the land around them. "This could all be mine. Should be mine. That creek runs through here. That's disputed territory. My grandfather's deed shows a different boundary line." "Your grandfather's deed is wrong," Thomas said. "This is Grayson land. We'll see what the territorial court says about that." Crawford's eyes went cold. "But courts are slow. Accidents happen. Fires start. Good men die." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Samuel appeared then, riding up from the south pasture. He said nothing, but his hand rested on his gun in a way that spoke volumes. Crawford saw him, and his smile widened. "The mute, Nathan's pet. You two make quite a pair, a killer's son and a man who can't even speak." He spat in the dust. "Tell Grayson I'll be back with a better offer, one he can't refuse." Crawford and his men rode off, leaving Thomas and Samuel watching them disappear into the distance. Samuel wrote on his slate, "Trouble." "Yeah," Thomas agreed. "Big trouble." That evening Thomas reported the encounter to Nathan. The older man's face went hard as stone listening to Crawford's threats. "He's been circling for years," Nathan said. "Wants the water rights to that eastern creek. Without it, his ranch will fail in 5 years. With it, he could expand. Maybe even challenge us." Nathan pulled out a map, spread it across his desk, drew a line with his finger. "This creek. It's the difference between survival and empire for Crawford. The deed to this land is clear, has been for 30 years, but he's claiming his grandfather's original survey was different." "Is there any truth to it?" Thomas asked. "None. I've checked. Had lawyers check. The land is mine. But Crawford's desperate, and desperate men do desperate things." Nathan's eyes found Thomas's. "I'm putting you in charge of organizing night watches. 3 men rotating, different positions each night. Crawford's the type to try sabotage if he thinks he can get away with it." It was a test. Thomas recognized it. More responsibility, more trust. "Yes, sir. I'll set up a schedule." Over the next week, strange things happened. A fence cut overnight, letting cattle wander. Water in the horse trough contaminated with salt, making 2 animals sick. Tools missing from the blacksmith shop. Nothing conclusive, nothing that could be proven. But the pattern was clear. Thomas organized the watches carefully, worked with Samuel to set up positions that covered the most vulnerable areas, trained the men in basic tracking and surveillance. It was not horse training anymore. It was leadership, and the men followed him. The first week of December brought another visitor. Walter Brennan, the traveling lawyer who'd helped Thomas in redemption, rode through the gate with saddlebags full of documents. He asked for Nathan and Thomas together. They met in Nathan's office. Walter looked older than Thomas remembered, tired, but his eyes were sharp with purpose. "I've been investigating Crawford's land claim," Walter said without preamble. "The survey maps he's been showing around, they're forgeries. Good ones, but forgeries. The territorial archives have the original surveys, clear boundaries. Nathan's deed is legitimate." Nathan leaned back in his chair. "That helps in court, but Crawford isn't going to wait for court." "No," Walter agreed, "which is why I kept digging." He pulled out another document. "This is more important. This is the final investigation report from the fire, the one that blamed William Mercer." Thomas's stomach clenched. Walter laid the paper on the desk. "I found an addendum, written by an independent engineer 6 months after the fire. He re-examined the scene, reanalyzed the design." He looked at Thomas. "Your father's installation was sound. The fire was caused by lightning strike to the roof. Dry lightning. It started a fire in the attic that spread to the chimney system. The engineer concluded that no chimney design could have prevented it. The house was old, dry timber. It was going to burn no matter what." The room went silent. Nathan picked up the report, read it slowly. His hands shook slightly. "William was innocent," Nathan said quietly. "The installation wasn't faulty. The fire wasn't his fault." "Why was this report buried?" Thomas asked, voice rough. "Insurance company," Walter said. "They didn't want to pay out the claim. Easier to blame faulty installation than act of God. The engineer's report contradicted their position, so they buried it, filed it away where no one would see." By the time I found it, William had been dead for months. There was no one left to clear his name." Nathan looked at Thomas. Really looked at him. "Your father. He carried that blame for 15 years, carried the weight of thinking he'd killed my family until the day he died." "I'm sorry," Nathan said, and his voice cracked. "I should have fought harder, should have demanded a full investigation. I let grief make me passive. I let them blame a good man." Thomas could not speak. His throat was too tight. 15 years of his father being branded a killer. 15 years of shame that should never have existed. "There's more," Walter said. He pulled out another document. "I took the liberty of drawing up partnership papers. 20% of the horse operations to Thomas Mercer, retroactive to his hire date. Fair compensation for his work and some measure of recompense for what his father was owed." Nathan took the papers, looked at them for a long time, then at Thomas. "You've earned this," Nathan said. "More than earned it. Your skill, your work, your character. You're not just an employee, you're a partner." Thomas felt tears pressing at the back of his eyes. Force them down. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Nathan said simply. "But Crawford," Walter interrupted. "The court hearing is scheduled for 2 weeks from now. If we wait until after then, formalize the partnership, we avoid any complications." Nathan nodded reluctantly. "Fine, we wait. But the offer stands, Thomas. After this is settled, you're a partner. That's a promise." Walter stood to leave. "One more thing. Crawford is desperate. The court case is his last chance legally. If he loses, he's ruined. And a ruined man is a dangerous man. Watch yourselves." After Walter left, Nathan and Thomas sat in silence. Finally, Nathan spoke. "Your father saved my life once. I never got to repay that debt. Maybe I can repay it now, through you." "You don't owe me anything," Thomas said. "I owe you everything," Nathan replied. "You brought something back to this ranch, something I thought died 15 years ago. Hope." That night, Thomas found Samuel in the stable, told him everything. The exoneration of William Mercer, the partnership offer, the threat of Crawford. Samuel listened, writing occasional questions on his slate. When Thomas finished, Samuel wrote something longer than usual, held it up with obvious emotion. "I was there the night of the fire. I was the one who called for the investigation. I believed William Mercer was innocent. No one listened to me. I can't talk. Easy to ignore a mute." He erased and continued. "I've carried guilt for 15 years, for not saving the boy, for not clearing William's name, for not being enough." Samuel's eyes met Thomas's. "You being here, you proving yourself. It's not just redemption for your father, it's redemption for me too." Thomas gripped Samuel's shoulder. "We're all trying to make something right out of something broken." Samuel nodded and wrote one more thing. "Then let's finish it. Together." The days counted down to the court hearing. Tension on the ranch ratcheted higher. The night watches caught someone trying to poison the well, caught them and chased them off. One of Crawford's men. No proof. But everyone knew. Margaret surprisingly began to soften. She watched Thomas work, saw his dedication, his skill, his honor. One morning she approached him in the corral. "Mr. Mercer?" Thomas turned wary. "Ma'am." "I owe you an apology," she said stiffly. "I blamed your father for 15 years, blamed you by extension. Walter showed me the engineer's report, showed me I was wrong." Her voice wavered. "I needed someone to blame, needed a target for my grief. I chose your father because he couldn't defend himself, and that was cruel." "He would have forgiven you," Thomas said quietly. "My father understood grief." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "You're a good man, better than I deserve." She turned and walked away before he could respond. That evening Thomas was grooming horses when Samuel appeared with his slate already written. "Tomorrow, Crawford will make his move. I can feel it." "How do you know?" Samuel flipped the slate. "Because I would. Court in 2 weeks. Time running out. One big move now, or lose everything." "What do we do?" "We prepare," Samuel wrote, "and we trust each other." As the sun set over Grayson Ranch, Thomas stood with Samuel and looked out at the land that had become home. Thought about his father, about Nathan, about the debts that bound them all together. Tomorrow would bring fire, or it would bring salvation. Thomas Mercer was ready for either. Back on the porch in 1960, old Thomas Mercer stopped speaking. He looked at his grandson Daniel with eyes that had seen too much and survived anyway. "That's where the story turns, son," Thomas said. "That's where everything we've built almost came apart." Daniel leaned forward. "Crawford attacked." "He did more than attack," Thomas said grimly. "He brought fire, again, to the one place that had already burned, to the one man who couldn't face it." He stood slowly, joints protesting, walked into the house and returned with an old newspaper clipping, yellow with age, the headline visible even from a distance. "Grayson Ranch destroyed, second fire in 15 years. Daniel took the paper with trembling hands. The fire came back. "Fire always comes back," Thomas said, "until you face it, until you walk through it, until you prove you're stronger than what burns." He looked out at the ranch, at the buildings built in stone, at the legacy forged from ash. And that's exactly what we did. The attack came 2 nights before the court hearing. Thomas was making final rounds of the stable, checking on the pregnant mare that was due any day. The November air had teeth in it. Cold enough to see your breath, but not yet cold enough for snow. The kind of night where sound carried and shadows felt alive. Samuel was with him. They'd fallen into the habit of working together in the evenings. 2 men who communicated better in silence than most men did with words. Thomas smelled it before he saw it. Kerosene, sharp and chemical. Wrong. He stopped mid-step, raised his hand to get Samuel's attention, pointed to his nose. Samuel's nostrils flared. He nodded, smelled it too. They moved toward the back wall of the stable where the smell was strongest. Thomas carried a lantern. Samuel had his hand on his gun. Behind a stack of hay bales they found it, rags soaked in kerosene, piled against the wooden wall, and next to it, barely visible in the shadows, a crude timing mechanism. Metal can, slow-burning fuse, designed to spark in maybe 2 hours, long enough for whoever placed it to be far away when the fire started. Thomas's blood went cold. This was not vandalism. This was murder. Anyone in the stable when this went off would have been trapped, would have burned. "Get Nathan," Thomas said. "Now." Samuel ran. Thomas carefully disassembled the device, pulled the fuse, moved the kerosene-soaked rags outside. His hands shook with rage and fear and the knowledge of how close they'd come to disaster. By the time Samuel returned with Nathan, Thomas had everything laid out as evidence. Nathan stared at it with an expression Thomas had never seen on his face. Not anger, terror. "He's going to burn us out," Nathan said, voice hollow. "Crawford's going to use fire." Margaret appeared from the main house wrapped in a shawl. She took one look at the kerosene and rags and went pale as chalk. "No, not again. Please God, not again." "We need to prepare," Thomas said, forcing his voice to stay steady. "Post guards on every building. Arm everyone. If Crawford's men come back tonight—" He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Nathan opened his mouth to give orders, but nothing came out. His eyes were fixed on the kerosene rags like they were a snake about to strike. His whole body had gone rigid. Thomas recognized the signs, recognized the paralysis. Nathan was seeing another night, another fire, 15 years ago. "Mr. Grayson," Thomas said gently. "Sir, I need you to—" Gunshots shattered the night, 3 sharp cracks from the direction of the eastern pasture, then shouting, then more shots, the sound of horses screaming. "They're already here," Samuel wrote frantically on his slate. Thomas made a decision in half a heartbeat, turned to the ranch hands who'd come running at the sound of gunfire. "Leo, Marcus, get buckets. Form a line from the well to the main house. Jebediah, you and Tom get rifles. Defensive positions on the barn roof. Robert, check all the other buildings for more kerosene." The men stared at him, looked at Nathan for confirmation. Nathan still stood frozen, eyes wide, seeing ghosts. "Move!" Thomas shouted with a command in his voice he didn't know he possessed. "Now!" The men moved. Samuel gripped his rifle and ran toward the sound of gunfire. Thomas turned back to Nathan. "Sir, I need you to get Margaret to safety. Take her to the stone cellar under the house. It's the most protected place on the ranch." Nathan's eyes focused slightly. He nodded, reached for Margaret's arm. "Come on." But before they could move, the night exploded with light. Fire bloomed at the eastern edge of the property. Not one fire, multiple. Torches thrown in quick succession. They landed on the old bunkhouse roof, on the fence near the corrals, on a hay wagon left too close to the barn. Crawford Pike rode through the gate at the head of 8 men, every one of them armed, every one of them carrying torches. "Grayson," Crawford's voice carried across the yard like a whip crack, "give up the deed to that eastern section. Sign it over right now, or watch everything burn." The bunkhouse roof was already catching, flames crawling across the dry shingles like living creatures. The heat could be felt even from 100 yards away. Thomas looked at Nathan. The older man had gone completely pale, was staring at the flames with an expression of absolute horror. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. His hands trembled. He was gone, lost in memory, paralyzed by trauma that 15 years hadn't healed. Crawford saw it too, saw Nathan frozen and helpless. He laughed. "The great Nathan Grayson, scared of a little fire. Sign the deed or I'll burn you out. You've got 1 minute." Thomas felt something ignite in his chest, not fear, rage. He stepped in front of Nathan, raised his voice loud enough to carry across the chaos. "Get off this property, now, or you'll hang for arson and attempted murder." Crawford focused on Thomas, smiled. "You're the Mercer boy, the one whose daddy killed Grayson's family, and here you are playing hero. That's rich." "My father didn't kill anyone," Thomas said. His hand moved to the rifle leaning against the stable wall. "And you're going to leave before someone gets killed tonight." "One mute can't stop all of us," Crawford said, gesturing to Samuel, who'd taken position near the barn with his rifle raised. "And you're a horse trainer, not a gunfighter." "He doesn't have to stop all of you," Thomas said, voice dropping to something cold and certain. "He just has to stop you." Samuel's rifle barrel tracked Crawford with professional precision. Crawford's smile faltered. "Last chance," Thomas said. "Leave." Crawford's face twisted with rage and desperation. "Then burn." His men threw their remaining torches. They arced through the air like falling stars and landed everywhere. On the stable roof, near the main house, on the fence posts that would carry fire like a fuse. And then Crawford's men opened fire. The ranch erupted into chaos. Bullets whipped through the air. Men scattered for cover. The bucket brigade tried to form but kept breaking as shots forced them to dive for safety. Samuel returned fire with calm efficiency. 3 shots. 3 of Crawford's men went down wounded, but not dead. The man was a professional. Even under pressure, even in darkness, he didn't miss. But there were too many fires now, too many fronts to defend. Thomas made the hardest decision of his life. Forget the bunkhouse. Let it burn. Save the stable and the main house. The men shifted focus, abandoned the bunkhouse to the flames, and concentrated their efforts on the buildings that mattered. The ones with people in them, the ones with animals. Thomas ran to the stable, started releasing horses from their stalls. They bolted into the night terrified by smoke and gunfire, better loose and scared than trapped and burning. Diablo was the last stall. The big black stallion was screaming, rearing, eyes white with terror. Thomas got the gate open, but Diablo wouldn't come out. Too scared, too traumatized. "Come on, boy," Thomas pleaded. "We have to go. Now." A burning timber fell from the roof, landed 5 feet away. Sparks showered across the straw. Thomas grabbed a blanket, threw it over Diablo's head to blind him, led him by feel and touch and desperate prayer. The horse finally moved, trusting Thomas even through his panic. They burst out of the stable just as more of the roof collapsed behind them. Diablo bolted toward the open pasture. Safe. Thomas turned back to assess the situation. The bunkhouse was fully engulfed, lost. The stable roof was burning, but the structure was still intact. The main house had flames on the porch, but men were fighting it with buckets. And then he saw Margaret. She'd ignored Nathan's order to hide, was in the main house office trying to save documents, important papers, deeds and contracts, and the legal foundation of everything Nathan had built. But the smoke was too thick. Thomas saw her through the window, staggering, holding papers, then collapsing. Nathan saw it too, saw his sister fall in a burning building, saw history repeating. He tried to move, tried to run to her, but his body wouldn't obey. His legs locked, his breath came in ragged gasps, his hands clutched at his chest like his heart was trying to escape. "I can't," Nathan whispered. Tears streamed down his face. "I can't do it again. I can't watch her die." Thomas looked at the burning house, looked at Margaret unconscious inside, looked at Nathan broken and helpless, looked at Samuel, who was wounded. One of Crawford's men had gotten a lucky shot, bullet through Samuel's shoulder. He was still fighting but bleeding badly. No one else was close enough. No one else could get there in time. It had to be Thomas. He grabbed a bucket of water, dumped it over his head and shoulders, soaked his shirt. It wasn't much protection, but it was something. "Mr. Grayson," Thomas said, "I'm going to get her." Nathan grabbed his arm. "Don't. You'll die. It's not worth it." "Yes, it is," Thomas said simply, "because you would do it if you could, and because she's family." He pulled away and ran toward the burning house before fear could stop him. The heat hit him like a wall. The smoke was a living thing clawing at his throat and eyes. He could barely see, barely breathe. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back. He kept moving, found the door. It was hot to the touch but not impassable. He wrapped his hand in wet cloth and shoved it open. Inside was hell. Flames ran up the walls. The ceiling groaned ominously. Smoke so thick it was like swimming through ink. "Margaret!" he shouted, but smoke choked the words. He dropped low where the air was marginally better, crawled toward the office, found her lying near the desk papers scattered around her, still breathing but unconscious. Thomas grabbed her under the arms, started dragging her toward the door. She was heavier than he expected. Dead weight. His lungs screamed for clean air. His eyes streamed tears. Halfway to the door, a burning beam fell from the ceiling. Thomas saw it coming, twisted to shield Margaret with his body. The beam glanced off his back. White-hot agony exploded across his shoulders. The smell of burning flesh, his own. He screamed but didn't stop moving. 3 more feet. 2. 1. They reached the door. Thomas kicked it open, gulped fresh air, kept dragging Margaret toward safety. And then the floor beneath them gave way. The boards, weakened by fire, simply collapsed. Thomas fell through into the cellar below. 12 feet straight down. He tried to twist, tried to protect Margaret, but gravity didn't care about intentions. They hit hard. Margaret landed on packed dirt, relatively soft. She groaned, but seemed intact. Thomas landed on stone, his left leg twisted under him with a sickening crack. Pain, white and absolute, shot through him. He felt something break. Knew immediately it was bad. Above them, the ceiling of the cellar became the floor of the burning office. Flaming debris rained down. The opening they'd fallen through was now blocked by a collapsed support beam. They were trapped. Thomas tried to move, tried to stand. His leg wouldn't support weight. Every attempt sent waves of agony through him that made his vision go gray. "Help!" he shouted, coughed on smoke. "We're in the cellar." Could anyone hear him over the roar of flames, over the gunfire that had finally stopped, over the chaos? He didn't know. Margaret stirred beside him, opened her eyes, saw the flames above, saw Thomas with his leg bent at an impossible angle. "Oh God, oh no." "It's okay," Thomas lied through gritted teeth. "They'll get us out." "The fire," Margaret whispered. Her voice was raw from smoke. "Just like before. I can't go through this again." Thomas grabbed her hand, held it tight. "You're not alone this time. We're getting out together." Above them he heard shouting. Nathan's voice, finally broken free from paralysis, screaming orders. Samuel's boots thundering across the porch, men working to clear debris. "Down here!" Thomas yelled with everything he had left. "We're in the cellar!" More shouting, the sound of wood being moved. hands digging. Thomas kept holding Margaret's hand, kept breathing despite the pain, kept believing they would make it because the alternative was unthinkable. It took 15 minutes that felt like hours. Nathan and Samuel and Leo and every hand on the ranch tearing through burning wood and stone to reach the cellar. When they finally broke through, Nathan was the first one down. He gathered Margaret in his arms like she weighed nothing, carried her up through the opening, past her to waiting hands. Then he came back for Thomas. "Can you stand?" Nathan asked. "Legs broken," Thomas said. "But I can try." Nathan lifted him, actually lifted him, carried him up through the wreckage the way you might carry a child. Thomas had never seen such strength in a man. They emerged into a dawn gray with smoke. The bunkhouse was ash. The stable was half burned but still standing. The main house was heavily damaged but not destroyed. Everywhere exhausted men sat or stood covered in soot and blood and the residue of the fight. Crawford and his men were gone. Fled when it became clear they were outmatched. Left their wounded behind. Samuel sat against a water trough, his shoulder bandaged with torn cloth. His face was pale from blood loss, but his eyes were alert. When he saw Thomas, he gave a small nod. "We made it." Nathan set Thomas down carefully. A ranch hand who'd served as a field medic in the cavalry examined his leg with gentle hands. "Compound fracture, bad one. We need to set it and splint it. This is going to hurt." "Do it," Thomas said. They gave him a leather strap to bite down on. Set the bone with Thomas screaming into the leather. Splinted it with boards and rope. Crude but effective. When it was done, Thomas lay panting in the dirt watching the sun rise over the ruined ranch. Nathan sat beside him. The older man's face was streaked with tears and soot. "You ran into the fire," he said, voice broken. "You did what I couldn't." "Someone had to," Thomas said. "I froze," Nathan said. "Just like 15 years ago. I stood there and let you risk your life because I was too broken to move." "You're not broken," Thomas said. "You're human. There's a difference." Nathan was quiet for a long time. Then he spoke, and the words felt like they'd been locked behind iron for 15 years. "The night of the first fire, when my wife died, when my son disappeared, I was in the barn checking on a sick horse. I heard the screams, saw the flames, ran to the house." His voice shook, but he kept going. "Catherine was in the hallway, already unconscious from smoke. I got her out, went back for my son, for Thomas. He was 7 years old and he slept on the second floor. The stairs were burning. I tried to go up, tried 3 times. The heat drove me back. I heard him screaming, calling for me, and I couldn't reach him." Nathan's hands clenched into fists. "I chose wrong. Should have gone for my son first, but I went for my wife and she died anyway. And my boy. I never found him. Assumed he'd run out a window and died in the wilderness. But no body. Never any proof. Last night I saw Margaret fall, and I froze. 15 years of guilt paralyzed me. If you hadn't been there." He couldn't finish. "But I was there," Thomas said. "And we're alive. All of us. That's what matters." Margaret approached, wrapped in a blanket, still coughing but upright. She sat on Thomas's other side. "Mr. Mercer, you saved my life at the cost of your own mobility. I don't know if I can ever repay that." "You don't need to," Thomas said. "We're family now. Family helps each other." Margaret started crying, real gut-wrenching sobs. "I blamed your father for 15 years, blamed you, was so hateful, and you still saved me." "My father would have done the same," Thomas said. "He was a good man, even when people forgot it, even when it cost him everything." Nathan put his hand on Thomas's shoulder. "I will never forget what you did. Never. You gave me back something I thought I lost in that first fire. You gave me proof that courage still exists in this world." 2 days later, Walter Brennan arrived with the territorial marshal. They arrested Crawford and his remaining men on charges of arson and attempted murder. The wounded men Crawford had left behind turned evidence against him, testified that he'd planned the whole attack, had ordered them to burn the ranch and kill anyone who resisted. The trial was swift by territorial standards. 3 weeks. Overwhelming evidence. Crawford was found guilty on all counts, sentenced to 20 years in territorial prison. His ranch was seized to pay damages, auctioned off. Nathan bought it, absorbed Crawford's land into his own. The water rights that had caused all the trouble became Nathan's without contest. It should have felt like victory, but Thomas was laid up with a broken leg that would take months to heal properly. The ranch was in ruins. Rebuilding would cost a fortune. 1 week after the fire, Walter visited Thomas in the room Nathan had given him in the partially repaired main house. The lawyer carried a folder thick with documents. "I found something," Walter said, settling into a chair by Thomas's bed. "Something important." He opened the folder and pulled out a page. Old, yellow with age, official-looking. "This is a record from the Montana Territorial Orphanage, August of 1870, 1 month after the fire." Thomas's attention sharpened. A boy was admitted, age 7, found wandering in the wilderness by a hunting party. He was in shock, wouldn't speak, didn't know his own name. The orphanage took him in, kept him for 2 years. Walter's eyes were intense. The description matches: dark hair, gray eyes, 7 years old, scars on his hands consistent with a burn injury. Nathan appeared in the doorway. He'd been listening. His face had gone white. "Where is he?" Nathan's voice was barely a whisper. "Where is my son?" Walter pulled out another document. He was adopted in 1872 by a family heading east, Pennsylvania, coal mining country. They gave him their name, Hayes. The room went absolutely silent. "Samuel's family," Thomas said. "Samuel Hayes." Walter nodded. "I believe Samuel and your son were raised together, became brothers through adoption. The records show 2 boys adopted by the same family in 1872. One was 9 years old, one was 13. Nathan staggered to a chair, sat down hard. "Samuel knows my son. Samuel was raised with him." "Where is Samuel now?" Walter asked. "Recovering from his gunshot wound," Nathan said. "In the bunkhouse." They found Samuel sitting up in bed, his shoulder heavily bandaged. His slate board was beside him. Nathan approached slowly, held out the orphanage record. "Samuel, read this." Samuel took the paper, read it carefully. His eyes widened. His hand started to shake. He grabbed his slate, wrote with trembling fingers. "Little Tom. I remember. We were brothers, adopted together when I was 13. He was 7. Good boy, kind, loved horses, scared of fire." Samuel's eyes filled with tears as he kept writing. "We were separated when I turned 16. Family couldn't afford 2 boys. I went to work in the mines, lost track of him, never knew his real name. He was just Tom to me." Nathan's voice broke. "Where is he now? Where is my son?" Samuel wrote. "I don't know. We lost touch 20 years ago. I came west. He stayed east last I knew. Pennsylvania, maybe." "We can find him," Walter said. "I can hire investigators, search Pennsylvania mining towns. If he's alive, we'll find him." Nathan looked at Samuel with an expression of wonder and pain mixed together. "You knew him. You were his brother. All these years you've been with me and you were connected to him." Samuel nodded, wrote, "I didn't know, never saw your family before the fire, never made the connection, but now it makes sense. Why I felt drawn to this ranch, why I stayed even when it hurt." He paused, then wrote, "I can help you find him. I remember things, details. We can start there." For the first time in 15 years, something like hope crossed Nathan's face. The search took 8 months. During that time, the ranch rebuilt. New stable, bigger and better built with stone foundation that wouldn't burn. New bunkhouse designed with multiple exits and fire safety in mind. The main house repaired and reinforced. Thomas's leg healed slowly. The break had been bad. Even after the bone knit, he walked with a slight limp, would always walk with it, a permanent reminder of the night he'd run into fire. But he could still ride, could still work with horses. The limp didn't matter for that. Margaret stayed on the ranch, helped coordinate the rebuilding. Her bitterness seemed to have burned away in the fire. Left behind was a woman finding purpose again. One evening in late June, Nathan called Thomas to his office. The room had been restored. New desk, new floor. But some of the old documents had survived, including the one Nathan now placed on the desk. "I'm making you a 30% partner in Grayson Ranch," Nathan said. "Not 20, 30, effective immediately." He slid a deed across. Thomas picked it up with hands that shook slightly. The name on the deed read, Grayson Mercer Ranch. "You changed the name," Thomas whispered. "This ranch was built on your father's sacrifice and your courage," Nathan said. "It should carry both our names." Thomas stared at the paper, read the words again and again. Grayson Mercer Ranch, established 1870, rebuilt 1886. "I don't know what to say," Thomas said. "Say you'll help me find my son," Nathan replied. "Say you'll stay. Say you'll build this into something that lasts." "I will," Thomas said. "I promise." 3 weeks later, a letter arrived from Pennsylvania. Walter's investigator had found him. Thomas Grayson, now 23 years old, working in a coal mine, married, wife expecting their first child. The investigator had approached carefully, asked questions, shown him the orphanage records. At first, Thomas Grayson didn't remember. The trauma of the fire had buried those early memories deep. But when shown a photograph of Nathan, something had stirred. A flicker of recognition. A dream half remembered. He agreed to meet his father. Agreed to come west. The reunion happened on a warm August afternoon. Thomas Mercer stood beside Nathan at the ranch gate watching a wagon approach. The young man who stepped down didn't look much like Nathan. He'd grown into his own features. But the eyes were exactly the same, storm gray, steady, true. Father and son stared at each other for a long moment. 22 years and 15 years separated by fire and fate and impossible chance. "I don't remember everything," Thomas Grayson said. His voice was rough from coal dust. "But I remember your face, in dreams, calling for me." Nathan's composure crumbled. He stepped forward and pulled his son into an embrace. Both men were crying, both holding on like they'd never let go. Thomas Mercer watched and felt his own eyes burn. This was what all the struggle had been for. This moment of healing. Over the next weeks, Thomas Grayson learned about the ranch, learned about the father he'd lost as a child, decided to stay, to build a life here with his wife and coming child. The ranch thrived with 3 partners. Nathan provided experience and capital. Thomas Mercer provided skill with horses and hard-won wisdom. Thomas Grayson brought youth and energy and a fierce determination to honor the family he'd regained. Samuel stayed too. The 4 of them became brothers in all but blood, united by survival and second chances. Margaret found peace, taught the young wives who came to the ranch how to cook and preserve and manage a frontier household, became something like a mother to the next generation. The ranch grew, prospered, became known throughout the territories as a place of quality horses and honest dealing. And Thomas Mercer saved every penny, built his own small ranch house on the northern section of the property, met a woman named Catherine in town, married her in 1890, raised children who grew up knowing horses and land and the value of hard work. On the porch in 1960, old Thomas Mercer finished his story. The afternoon sun had moved across the sky. Hours had passed. Daniel sat transfixed, trying to absorb it all. "So Grandpa William's son," Daniel said slowly, "the Thomas who died in the fire, he came back." "He did," Thomas said, "and he became my brother. We ran this ranch together for 34 years until Nathan passed in 1920. Then we ran it together for another 20 until Thomas Grayson died in 1940. He pointed to a photograph on the porch table. 3 men standing in front of the ranch sign. Thomas Mercer, Thomas Grayson, Samuel Hayes, brothers in every way that mattered. "Your father," Thomas said, "Thomas Grayson, Jr. He was named for both of us, carries both legacies." Daniel's eyes widened. "So I'm descended from both families, Grayson and Mercer." "You are," Thomas said. "You carry the best of both. Nathan Grayson's strength and determination, William Mercer's skill and honor, all mixed together in your blood. He handed Daniel the wooden box. William's box, the one that had started everything. This is yours now. Inside is the letter your great-great-grandfather wrote, the one that sent me on this path. Read it, understand it, remember it. Daniel opened the box with reverent hands, pulled out the yellowed letter, read the words William Mercer had written so long ago. A man is not defined by what he loses. He is defined by what he builds again. That's the lesson, son, Thomas said. That's what I want you to understand. Your great-great-grandfather lost everything. I lost everything. But we built again, from nothing, from ashes, from broken pieces. He gestured to the ranch spread out before them. This didn't come from inheritance, didn't come from luck. It came from work, from sacrifice, from people who refused to quit even when everything burned. Catherine came out onto the porch carrying lemonade. She set it down and put her hand on Thomas's shoulder. He covered her hand with his own, the gesture of 60 years together. "Tell him the rest," Catherine said gently. Thomas smiled. "Your grandmother thinks I'm getting sentimental in my old age. She's right." He pulled out one final photograph, recent, just a few years old. It showed this very porch, Thomas and Catherine, their children, their grandchildren, 3 generations. "You asked why I never talked about your great-great-grandfather," Thomas said. "I didn't talk about him because the story was too big to tell in pieces, too important to rush. You needed to be old enough to understand it. What you're standing on, Daniel, this ranch, this family, this legacy, it was bought with fire and pain and blood and courage. It was built by men who had every reason to quit and didn't, by men who faced their worst fears and walked through them anyway." He looked Daniel in the eye. "Your great-great-grandfather couldn't give me a ranch. He lost his. But he gave me something better. He gave me a promise, a debt owed, a connection that brought me here when I had nothing else. Nathan Grayson took that connection and gave me a chance. I took that chance and ran into fire to save his family. Together, we built something that lasted." Thomas's voice grew stronger. "That's your inheritance, boy. Not the land, not the buildings, not the money in the bank. Your inheritance is the knowledge that you come from people who rebuilt, people who turned loss into legacy." Daniel wiped his eyes. "What do I do with that?" "You honor it," Thomas said simply. "You work hard, you treat people right, you build something worth passing on. And when everything falls apart, because it will, you remember that Mercers and Graysons don't quit. We build again." Catherine spoke softly. "Your grandfather walked across the Montana Badlands with nothing but a horse and a wooden box, lived in a bunkhouse, broke his leg in a fire, limped for the rest of his life. But he never stopped building. That's who you come from," Thomas said. "That's the blood in your veins. Mercer and Grayson, 2 families that should have been enemies united by tragedy and choice." He stood slowly, joints protesting, walked to the porch rail, looked out at the land he'd spent 40 years shaping. "You know what the best part is," Thomas said. "Nathan found his son, after 15 years of thinking he was dead, found him and got 20 years together before Nathan passed, 20 years of joy after 15 years of grief. William Mercer's debt was repaid, his name was cleared, his son prospered on the land he'd lost. Samuel found his voice through action if not through words, became family instead of just a hired gun. Margaret healed, found purpose again after being lost in bitterness. And me," Thomas smiled. "I came here with nothing, with shame and failure and a broken promise. I left here with everything that matters, family, purpose, legacy." He turned back to Daniel. "Fire came twice to this ranch, tried to destroy us twice, but we're still here, stronger for having survived it. That's the real lesson." The sun touched the western ridge painting everything gold, the same ridge where Nathan had told Thomas the men would eat, where everything had started on a desperate afternoon 35 years ago. "I have one more thing to show you," Thomas said. He walked into the house slowly, favoring his old injury, and returned with a wooden sign. Carved and painted. Beautiful work. "This hung over the cookhouse at the original ranch," Thomas said. "The cookhouse where your great-grandmother used to work before she married your great-grandfather, before any of us were born." The sign read, "Built 1885, burned 1886, rebuilt 1887, still standing." "That's the Grayson Mercer way," Thomas said. "We burn, we rebuild, we stand." He handed the sign to Daniel. "You're 16 now. In a few years, this ranch will start becoming your responsibility. Maybe you'll want to do something different. Go to college, live in a city. That's your choice. But if you stay, if you choose this life, then you need to understand what you're choosing. You're choosing work. You're choosing struggle. You're choosing to be the kind of person who runs into fire when others freeze." Daniel held the sign with both hands. "I want to stay. I want to learn. I want to be like you and great-great-grandfather William." Thomas's eyes filled, but he didn't look away. "Then I'll teach you. Everything I know. Everything your father knows. Everything this land has taught us." Catherine brought out dinner. They ate on the porch as the sun set and the stars began to appear. 3 generations, stories and laughter, and the comfortable silence of family. Later, after Daniel went to bed, Thomas sat alone on the porch with Catherine beside him. The night was cool, clear, the kind of night where you could see every star in creation. "Do you think you told it right?" Catherine asked. "I told it true," Thomas said. "That's all that matters." "He'll carry it forward," Catherine said. "You can see it in his eyes. He understands." Thomas nodded. "William started something when he wrote that letter. Nathan continued it when he hired me. I'm just the middle part. Daniel will take it further than any of us imagined." He looked at the ranch buildings in the darkness, the stable built of stone, the house rebuilt after fire, the fence line stretching to horizons he'd walked when he had nothing. "You know what I think about most," Thomas said. "That day in the desert, when I thought I'd die with nothing, no home, no family, no future, just a horse and a wooden box and a letter pointing north. If someone had told me then that I'd end up here, partner in the biggest ranch in Montana, married to you, father to our children, grandfather to Daniel, I wouldn't have believed them." Catherine took his hand. "You earned every bit of it." "No," Thomas said quietly. "I was given a chance, by Nathan, by Samuel, by you, by everyone who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. The earning came after, but the chance came first." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I hope William knows, wherever he is, I hope he knows that his letter saved me, that his debt was repaid, that his son honored his name." "He knows," Catherine said. "A father always knows." They sat together as the night deepened. An old man and an old woman who'd built a life from ashes and faith and stubborn refusal to quit. Inside the house, Daniel lay awake in bed holding the wooden box. He opened it carefully, looked at the photograph of his ancestors, read the letter one more time. A man is not defined by what he loses. He is defined by what he builds again. He understood now, understood the weight of the words, the truth of them. Tomorrow he would wake early, would work with his grandfather, would learn the horses and the land and the 1,000 skills that made a man worthy of the legacy he carried. Tomorrow he would start building. But tonight he held the box that had crossed a desert and survived a fire and carried a promise through 40 years, held it like the precious thing it was, a connection to the past, a foundation for the future, proof that from ashes something beautiful could grow. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, the same stars that had watched William Mercer save a man from hanging, that had watched Thomas Mercer cross a desert, that had watched fire burn and families break and rebuild, the same stars that would watch Daniel carry the story forward. Grayson and Mercer, 2 names, 1 family, 1 legacy, built from loss, forged in fire, standing still.